Hey guys, it's Frederik from the FWX podcast. I've been talking quite a lot about certain terminology when it comes to storytelling and stories, and I've been going over the superhero genre quite a lot now in the two videos I've done previously, and obviously you can't have heroes without having supervillains as well. And so that's what I'm gonna talk about in this video. But before I start, I'd like for you to know that you can like this video. You can also subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of content so that you can follow whenever I drop a new episode. Also, you can share this with family, friends, people at work, or here online. And you can comment away in the comment section, but do keep it polite and friendly. And I'm gonna start talking now about super villains and all the necessary henchmen. Well, the most important ones, because otherwise we'd be having a really long episode here. Okay, so let's start with some of the most amazing ones. I'm gonna handle this by using a couple of lists and, of course, talk about those most important ones, of course. So, I guess it's no surprise to any of you that I want to start talking about one of the biggest super villains there is, especially on the DC side. And this is, in fact, one that has gotten its own movie, or in fact, two movies. And of course, I'm talking about this guy, the Joker. Now, one thing that already comes to my mind is that we never actually learn of a real name when it comes to the Joker overall. Of course, in those two movies with Joaquin Phoenix as him, he does have a name, Arthur Fleck. And he has his own story about, well, actually, now that I think about it, it's kind of like an origin story for the Joker in itself, with that movie with Joaquin Phoenix, and the second one with him and Lady Gaga as Harley Quinn, also another supervillain in his own right, a hench woman to the Joker, and was also been portrayed before by another great actress, Margot Robbie. And the Joker really, I've said before that Batman's villains are based on like like a mental disorder or on a specific kind of psychological level. And I think the Joker pretty much stands for absolute torpor, chaos, and psychopathy, if that's the right way to say it. And so he is an agent of chaos, as it is said in the Dark Knight movie. Which, of course, is one of the best depictions of the Joker. And of course, there have been many iterations of the Joker, even in the 20th century. I'm thinking of Cesar Romero, for instance. Of course, being a younger person, a millennial, I grew up with the other versions in the last 25 years. I think my personal favorite is still to this day Heath Ledger. I will also mention the other big ones. Of course, I've already said Joaquin Phoenix in the two Joker movies. The first one and Folie à deux. That's, by the way, how you're really supposed to say that. Which is like, translated, that would be shared madness. And there's a more specific thing about it, but you can look that up. So, for me, it is the Heath Ledger. Of course, Joaquin Phoenix, as I just said, in the Joker movies. And there's also another one I absolutely need to mention that is more known for the TV side and also the game side. And that is, of course, the incredible Mark Hamill, who was in the legendary TV show and in the Arkham games. Of course, you can't write Arkham without Mark Hamill. And so he is up there for me too. It is still Heath Ledger for me personally. Of course, Joaquin Phoenix comes in pretty close. Mark Hamill straddles the line with Joaquin Phoenix on the second spot, basically. And the others are on the rest. I think an honorable mention is necessary for Troy Baker in the Arkham Origins version. And what's more to say about the Joker? Obviously, he has a very specific visual. He uses a lot of purple. He has green hair. And then, of course, the very pale face that he has from. Well, let's talk origin for a moment, too. So, he at one point got into a vat of liquids, likely at a chemical spill. I'm trying to think. There's actually a place, a named place that is used. I'm gonna look that up for a moment. So, like, I'll make the comparison for a moment. So so the comparison I was thinking of is that in the Spider-Man lore, there is a place called Alchemax where they are making spiders to, well, not just spiders, but other things as well. And there's an opposite company in the DC Comics and in the digital media where the Joker, before he became the Joker, fell into one of those vats and he had that change for him, which resulted, I'll show the picture again, in the very white face that he has with the green hair. Basically, turning away at anything fleshy that was on him, basically. Changing him forever. And, well, in the older stuff from the Joker, in the pre-21st century stuff, there's actually a person, Jack Napier, who fell into a chemical plant in Gotham City called Axis Chemicals. And he was submerged there and transformed into the Joker. And also iconic to the Joker is the laugh. Of course, I can't do it, so that's tough. Of course, for that kind of stuff, you can look that up online, on YouTube, or you can check out the masters of those laugh. I really recommend checking out the Mark Hamill stuff, because he's the one that really nails it. While Heath Ledger had a take on his own. Although I do very much like his version as well. Also, he has those amazing lines from the Dark Knight movie. The scar stuff, for instance. Do you know how I got these scars? There's another line that I'm thinking of. There's a common phrase we use: what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. He has a version of that where he says, what doesn't kill you makes you stranger. That's another line that I love from The Dark Knight. And so, the Joker is very much Batman's arch nemesis, as you can clearly see in this picture, of course. And he's been tormenting Batman well, for so damn long. And he's arguably the biggest villain there is when it comes to the DCU. DC universe. Yes. And there are other versions of him as well. There's even a version, an interesting one, where it's not just him, it's the combination of Batman and Joker. And this version is called The Batman Who Laughs, which is a really crazy story that I should know more about. Okay, I feel like that's enough about the Joker right now. But I needed to talk about him because he is rightfully one of the craziest supervillains that there is. Quite literally crazy. I think a villain very much shared with Batman and very important to Batman is this guy. And it's in his many iterations. And there's two ways to say his name. There is Ra's al Ghul and Raish al Ghul. And he's also called the head of the demon, and he is the leader of the League of Assassins, that also people like to call the League of Shadows, which is basically an organization set on changing the world through killing. For killing the right people. And I'll show this picture again. He's a very interesting villain. He's been portrayed quite a couple of times. You have, for instance, Liam Neeson in The Dark Knight, Batman Begins, in fact, from that trilogy, where he played the character, to frighteningly good version. And there's also, of course, the version of him from the animated versions. And then this guy is from the Gotham show. And I thought that he was decent too. But this one is, of course, a younger version, a bit more empathetic, maybe. And so he's pretty much a leader more than a fighter. But because he has an organization that follows him and is loyal to him, he presents quite a big threat because he can send out his men and women. And yes, I do say women deliberately here too, because he has two people, two daughters, in fact, and a son that are often dealing with Batman. And of course, talking about Nissa al Ghul and Talia al Ghul. And there's also a son called Dusan, who we haven't seen a lot of in especially digital media. And personally, I think it'd be really cool if we ever see him too. Of course, where they also present a nice attention is in the Arkham games too. They appear in those games too, where I'm thinking back, it was in City, where Batman has to Arkham City being originally the second game of the trilogy, but there's actually 4 because of Origins. And I'm gonna check if I have it right, just to be sure. So there's been quite a few of those games. Oh yeah. So originally you had three of those games. You had Arkham Asylum, you had Arkham City, and Arkham Knight. And then another one was added, and that is Origins, which tells the origins of Batman and his villains. And this is also an incredible line of video games because they're very story oriented, but of course you get to live and fight like Batman, and that is of course an incredible thing to do because Batman is arguably one of the coolest superheroes. And at one point, you also get to fight Ra's al Ghul himself and his followers too. And those two, especially Ra's, uh, appears a lot, and there have been many iterations, just like the Joker. And I'll show that picture again, in fact. So those are just 4 versions, but there are another couple ones that you can find of him. And of course, they're very tight with Batman. Of course, sometimes the Joker does also slip into other places. I remember there's a version of the Joker where he goes to Metropolis and takes out every one of the Daily Planet's staff, including a pregnant Lois Lane, which makes this guy absolutely distraught and devastated because of what happened. And the version of that I'm thinking about is in the Arrowverse, especially during the crossover, where we see that guy appear in a more Kingdom Come like uniform, which is the more streamlined version, where you see Brandon Routh, who also played one of the Supermans before. And yeah, of course, seeing as I'm talking about Superman now, I should talk about his main villain, his arch enemy, and that is of course this guy, Lex Luthor. And of course, recently with the new Superman movie out, you have a new actor playing him, and that is the guy here on the other side, Nicholas Hoult. And as far as I've heard, he does the job pretty good. He does it pretty well. And I'm excited to see it. I'm gonna see it in some time. And thinking about talking about the villains of Diana Prince, Wonder Woman, but I know only. Well, I should mention, of course, someone that I've talked about before in both videos. Someone that we see a lot of these days, and before too. Pedro Pascal played a version of. Oh, God damn, I'm missing the damn name. All of a sudden. Maxwell Lord. That was the damn name. Yes. And he's also in that movie. Now I'm remembering. In the new Superman movie. And that's pretty much all I can say about this new movie without actually having seen it. But yeah, that is basically. And of course, there are many more villains when it comes to DC. But these are the most well known ones. And of course, there are many more. Like, for instance, I think of that cyborg alien that Superman has to deal with a lot. Brainiac. Actually, a big help for me when it comes to Superman is, of course, that Supergirl show from the Arrowverse that I'm thinking about, where Brainiac does also appear. And also, I know it wasn't really a very good game, but that Justice League Kills the DC Universe game, he appeared as the big villain in that one. And also important to point out here, those three heroes that we see in our traditional media, these guys, importantly to know in that game, they are turned. They get turned to do a more villainous role, except for her, of course. And if you want to know more about that, of course, you should play that game, of course. I've heard that, well, despite it being very loot boxy, it's still a fairly good game. I know it's very much like a Fortnite or something like that in that kind of way, full of loot boxes and weapons and skins and all of that. But I feel like that is the main of it. Of course, there's many more villains we could be talking about right here. I'll mention a couple more. I mentioned the show that I watched before Gotham, where you see those main villains taking shape, like Mr. Freeze and Scarecrow and the Penguin, of course. Of course, I need to mention here that there was that amazing series with Colin Farrell in the shape of the Penguin, and they also won a couple of awards, if I'm not mistaken, including Colin Farrell himself and Kristen Milioti as Falcone. I'm thinking of the other villains. I said Mr. Freeze. I said there's also the Riddler, of course, and the Penguin. I also already said, yeah. Okay. There's many more villains to talk about when it comes to DC, but now I want to talk about Marvel. Of course, because they're hot on them. They're hot right now. They're on fire with their villains. Of course, there's some nitpicks, of course, but there have been many good ones. Obviously, the very big one right now, of course, that we need to worry about and that they have to worry about in universe is, of course, this guy, Doctor Doom. And I know it's a controversial casting, but I think it will be interesting to see RDJ portray that guy. And I don't know if everybody knows this, but initially he has been asked to meet with Marvel before the whole Iron Man saga came to be, to actually portray Doctor Doom. And he initially was thought to be that actor. Also, unfortunately, we recently heard that initial actor who plays Doctor Doom in those movies, the ones with Jessica Alba and Ioan Gruffudd. Unfortunately, that actor has sadly passed away recently, and of course, I'm sad that actor passed away. Of course, and of course, many people say that those movies weren't that good. Of course. But they needed to set a staple. They needed to start somewhere. Of course, the main thing about especially that second movie is that Galactus wasn't handled all that well. But that does make me interested in the new Fantastic Four, of course. And also because this guy is so uh, necessary for that origin. And I've heard tell that perhaps he's in it for a moment. Um, but it's going to be interesting to see how the actor that portrayed this guy, Iron Man, of course, is going to play Doctor Doom. Of course, I've seen some images online that there's a version where Tony Stark becomes Doctor Doom. And I don't know that storyline all that well, so I can't really talk about it, but I'm interested to see what it's going to do. Because I know that, show him again, I know that this guy is going to nail it. There's not a role I haven't seen him in that he hasn't nailed before. Robert Downey Jr. It was absolutely amazing in Oppenheimer and deservedly won an award for it as well. And yeah, there hasn't been something that I've seen him be bad in. So I'm excited to see Doctor Doom appear in the upcoming Avengers movies. Speaking of, there is of course a main villain previously in the MCU that we've seen build up. And I'm of course talking about this guy, Thanos. I've talked a bit before about him, and the reason why I'm holding my hand like this is because Josh Brolin, who played Thanos, has also played Cable before, and that was in the Deadpool movies, of course, where, as far as I know, Cable is a time traveler who sets out to take people out. And but my thing with that is that I'm not a huge Deadpool fan. It gets so meta, deeply meta, not to mention extremely vulgar. And I'm not talking about the blood. Most of the times I can handle the blood. In fact, just an FYI for you guys for a moment, I personally think there's a genre of action where you can see it splatter all over the camera, basically. And there's some other movies that I've talked about before, on and off. Like, for instance, the Kingsman movies with Taron Egerton. That is basically where it happens, for instance. There's also, of course, maybe the most well-known person to do this is Tarantino in almost every one of his movies, where the blood literally splatters the camera. And there's a couple more. There's a female-led movie with Karen Gillan, who also played a superhero character in the MCU before, Nebula, called Milkshake Bullet. I'll look it up for a moment. Gunpowder Milkshake. I was mixing it up for a moment. That's the name of the movie, in which she is a hit woman, and she's trying to. It's kind of like your general action movie with a lot of blood, with a lot of enemies. And I guess you could say this is a more feminist take because all the leads are incredible female actors. I'll tell you some of the names, including one we've seen in Marvel before, Angela Bassett, who played an Oscar-worthy performance in Black Panther 2. I've talked about that on the podcast before when I tackled the Black Panther movies. Others include Carla Gugino, I hope I said that right, and Lena Headey from Game of Thrones, where she played Cersei. There's also Chloe Coleman and Michelle Yeoh, who has also been inside the Marvel Cinematic Universe as Shang-Chi's mother, for instance, and another role in the Guardians of the Galaxy. Hit it if you miss it kind of role. Yeah, I wanted to mention that here for a moment because well, since superhero genre is such a huge thing these days, it's almost I'm gonna rephrase for a moment. The superhero genre is so huge these days, like it's almost a given that you see an actor get into it. Interesting enough is not, of course, is that you can go the DC routes or the Marvel routes or even a spin-off Marvel route if it's the Spider-Verse or that something to do with Spider-Man Sony route, which was its own thing. And you can hear by how I'm talking about that, how I feel about it. And yeah, that's basically how I feel about those movies. The Sonyverse, I will call it for a moment. But I'm gonna bring up Josh playing Thanos for a moment back up because he was such a nice, he was such a cool character with a great build up throughout the phases, the first three phases of the MCU, because you literally see him start to get more powerful as he slowly, one by one, gets all the Infinity Stones. You know, the time, space, power, um, the Soul Stone, the Mind Stone, and what was the last one? I'm missing the last stone. There's one more. And in Infinity War, you basically see him do that, which is also still one of my favorite MCU movies to date. Because personally, and this is a personal take, at that point I'm rooting for him to win. Like, it's extremely cool to see him go up against all the heroes on both his home planet of Titan and on Earth in Wakanda, along with his Black Order and all his troops, because there's those four-legged or even more legged freaks that attack Wakanda. And yeah, I really like Thanos as a villain. He really serves the plot well. And of course, you can't get enough of Josh Brolin either. He's done so many works at this point. It's kind of venturing into Pedro Pascal's sphere way of being everywhere. There's also that new Weapons movie that is out, which I probably won't watch because I'm not a horror fan. That he's also in, by the way. Yeah. But let's talk about some other villains as well. I've talked ad nauseum at this point about Spider-Man, who has arguably one of the biggest villain. He has arguably one of the biggest hauls of villains, from Dr. Octavius, Doc Ock, to Hydro Man, to Norman Osborn, the Green Goblin, to all the other villains that are interesting. And since I talked about the Spider-Verse earlier, I have to also mention that on occasion a superhero might turn on himself, for instance. And that is what happens in the second one, so not a spoiler alert if you haven't seen this movie, but the leader of the Spider Society in the Spider-Verse movie, the second one, basically turns on Miles because he sees him as not worthy of being a Spider-Man. because Miles got bitten by a spider that came from a different universe. And it's very interesting to see how someone supposedly in a high position and actually is doing good things and is trying to keep keep everyone and everything together, trying to keep his shit together, turn on his people so hard. Like, speaking of Miles, he's got some amazing villains himself, which also informs his story. For instance, the Prowler. Very cool villain from the first Spider-Verse movie. Um, Turns out to be family. His uncle. Yeah, spoiler alert if you haven't seen that one either. But if you haven't seen that one, well, you're depriving yourself of seeing perhaps one of the best superhero comic book movies ever. It's absolutely worth it. There's also, I've talked about this in the previous video before, there's some moments where also Peter Parker himself turns. And of course, we've already seen in some movies that he also does this easily when it comes to the Venom symbiote, which has been pretty present as well. Of course, you have those Venom movies from the Sonyverse that I was talking about earlier, with how I feel about them. Haven't seen absolutely none of them, by the way. I'm pretty glad that I've never seen one of those, because they're not worthy. And yeah, that Venom symbiote, it does a lot to Peter. Fortunately enough, it's got that a weakness of its own, like that sort of hyper pitch from a church bell. That's basically the thing that does it for the symbiote. There's more knowledge about it, of course, and potentially Sony, with the Sonyverse, was going to do like a big Avenger level kind of thing where people were gonna band together and stop the creator of the symbiotes, that is Null, written as K-N-U-L-L. But I wanted to mention here also that it's not just a Venom symbiote. On occasion, I've learned online that there's a version of Spider-Man that is a fucking serial killer. And I find that an interesting take for Spider-Man, especially given that we're about to see and that they're working on the present Spider-Man movie, Brand New Day. And I'm interested in seeing what is going to happen, given where Spider-Man is at right now on his arc, on his emotional stability and his financial stability, because that's part of his life, is just how stable am I or not. I've talked before about Black Widow and how initially her background says that she's an assassin, and initially her story is that she's a villain that wants to be a hero, and we see that happen in the MCU, of course. But I've also said that maybe there's a possible report that maybe we're gonna see once again an evil version of the Black Widow. Don't know who's gonna do that, because as far as I know, Scarlett Johansson has said that she's not coming back for that role. But her buddy Chris Evans might, because there's also been the report that possibly he might return for playing Captain America, because, well, he's had some luck with some roles besides Marvel. But we'll see. Of course, we need to talk about the MCU villains regardless. There have been some amazing ones, there have been some absolute torturous ones. Let me know what you think about those in the comments, by the way. One of the most well known villains when it comes to Spider Man, we've seen a ton of, is of course the Green Goblin, Norman Osborn, and also in that first trilogy with Sam Raimi, also Harry Osborn, who has also now appeared in the MCU through that uh, Friendly Spider Man animated series that I haven't seen. Of course, easily the biggest one of Spider Man's villains, and practically his arch enemy. And of course, when it comes to Green Goblin himself, the actor portraying him in those movies, especially that first trilogy, Willem Dafoe, is an absolutely fantastic actor. And actually, to bring it back to DC for a moment, a lot of people have said online that he would be a very, very good Joker potentially, because he's got that crazy thing that he can do with his smile. And, having played a psychopath before always helps, of course. Alright, there's more villains to talk about here. I've talked about Lex Luthor. Since I brought up Cable before, meaning the tie-in and the red line between the Deadpool part, then there's also the X-Men. I've seen last year, I saw it last year, the Amazing X-Men animated show that Marvel put out, which was freaking amazing. And well, that brings me to someone who straddles the line between being a superhero and a supervillain, Magneto. And of course, the actors that have played him before, that being one of my all-time favorite actors of an older age, Ian McKellen, and also Michael Fassbender in the younger days of Magneto. And Magneto is such an interesting character because of his, not only his heritage and what he can do with his powers, because he's practically on an Omega level. For those who don't know, Omega is basically like the top tier when it comes to the X-Men. And there's many more like those, like his buddy Xavier. And yeah, he's a very interesting character because he straddles that line. Because how much is he willing to do? How much is he willing to sacrifice? And he also believes in a bit more supremacy kind of things when it comes to the X-Men, who sees things a bit more white and dark, black and white. That's what I wanted to say. Despite having grown up in such a tragic time, of course, I'm talking about the 1940s with the Second World War, with what happened then. Okay, let's talk about some other villains. I've talked about Thanos, I've talked about Doctor Doom. I'm reading off a list, by the way. Here's another interesting one. So, I've talked about the Arrowverse quite. I've talked about the. I'm sorry, I'm gonna rephrase. I've talked about the Arrowverse quite a bit. One of the most coolest villains that they have ever done was the Reverse Flash, played by both Tom Cavanaugh and the other actor. I'm missing his damn name for a moment. Just a second. Oh, sorry. Ah, wait. I'm remembering it now. Yeah, the other one is Matt Letcher. So, sorry for that long pause, by the way. So, the Reverse Flash is a very interesting character that has been played in the Arrowverse with by Tom Cavanaugh and Matt Letcher. Tom Cavanaugh especially in the Flash show, and Matt Letcher mostly in the Arrowverse in a whole, appearing in multiple shows, but especially in the Legends of Tomorrow show, which is my favorite show from the Arrowverse. I loved the Flash and Arrow, but Legends of Tomorrow is where it was at for me personally. Which also brings me back to the villains, and often villains are not just playing on their own and making up their schemes and doing crimes and all of that. Sometimes they're also groups. And since I'm talking about the Arrowverse now, in season 2, there is a group that forms called the Legion of Doom. And I recently saw those episodes again where they appear, and that is with the Reverse Flash and with Malcolm Merlyn, played by John Barrowman, and also Damien Dark, played by another actor who we've also seen in Marvel. That also happens on occasion where you see people hop from one universe to the other, and I mean in the superhero sense, because there's actors that have played in both universes. Just a second. Neil McDonough. That's the actor that plays Damien Dark. Also brings me back to a villain I've talked about before, and that is Ra's al Ghul, because Damien Dark was originally a member of the League of Assassins, who traded in his training for magic, because he's a magic user in the Arrowverse. But a pretty cool one. All three of them are pretty cool. Malcolm Merlyn is also known as the Archer. Dark Archer specifically. I'm gonna go back to that list I was looking at. And so the three of them, Malcolm Merlyn, the Reverse Flash, and then Damien Dark, they are the Legion of Doom. And at the end of season 2 of Legends of Tomorrow, they band together and rule, basically. But because they're petty bitches, they basically toy with the legends, which results in their unfortunate end. And there's some more villains I want to talk about now. So let's continue with the next one. Of course, I need to mention before I do that the Reverse Flash is basically the nemesis of the Flash, of Barry Allen. There's some more, of course. The other two on this list are actually not Marvel or DC characters, but they also have recently been in digital media in uh, a recent shows. For instance, stuff like The Boys. And I haven't seen those, but I just want to mention here that, for instance, there is Homelander, which is like a nationalistic take on Superman, kind of a combination of what Captain America is and Superman mixed into one, but then with no scruples. And that's basically all I know about him. And also that he's being played by Anthony Starr, who has been for a long time been dreamcasted as potentially the Reverse Flash, actually, in the DCU, which will be interesting. But I think there's many more interesting castings when it comes to all the different characters that we haven't seen yet for the DCU. Okay, and then the last one on this list is also from that same kind of universe, Omni-Man, from the Invincible series. And I said before that there's a certain kind of a genre when it comes to action where it gets where it gets incredibly bloody, and this series is pretty much also that, where you see basically blood litter the screen. But personally, I don't watch those shows because I just don't know anything about them. I'm very ignorant when it comes to them. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna talk about some other villains as well. I'm gonna go over these fast. I've talked a bit about the Penguin when it comes to Batman. Of course, he's one of those villains that gets pretty interesting when you see more personal stuff. For instance, like that show with Colin Farrell and Milioti. And he's on this list because, well, absolutely amazing role for which he got several awards. Followed up by a character I know not a lot about, but I should mention because the Phantasm is a masked individual that hides a woman underneath, which, let's be honest, that doesn't happen a lot. We don't see a lot of female villains, although I'm in favor of seeing some more. I'd love to see some more movie villains in recent years. Also, I have to mention, of course, we should be seeing more. We're already seeing some more, and I'll come to that in a moment because I'm thinking that the person I'm thinking about right now is actually on this list. Another important Batman villain is, of course, Bane. You know, the one with the breathing problem, of course. I hope you heard that. And of course, one of the places that we've seen Bane in is, of course, the Dark Knight trilogy, especially in the last one, The Dark Knight Rises, when he's played by Tom Hardy. And there again, I'm talking about someone who has bridged both the Marvel stuff and the DC stuff. We have Tom Hardy portraying Eddie Brock in the Sonyverse. Okay. Yeah, like I said before at the very start of this video, when you look at the villains one-on-one, they get very interesting. And that has been done before with Bane 2. Like I just said, in The Dark Knight, but also is prominent in those Arkham games as well. As a villain, mostly. Okay, let's continue with this list. I've mentioned the Riddler before. There have been many iterations of him. And the next one that I saw on this list is also the most recent one in Matt Reeves' Batman movie, where Paul Dano plays a pretty frightening, more modern take of the character. Kind of like an incel figure who is masked and who loves riddles and clues. Also, I'm gonna butt in an honorable mention here from that Gotham show that I've talked about before, where the villains kind of work side by side, but not all the time as well. And we kind of look up the name just to be sure. You know what? I'll just say that in Gotham, the Penguin works a lot with the Riddler, and so those two roles are a lot in here. Because, for instance, you have Robin Lord Taylor playing the Penguin, and Corey Michael Smith as the Riddler. And those two were absolutely fantastic in their jobs. Of course, I have seen Robin Lord Taylor before in another series that I've talked about on the podcast before. It's kind of a brief moment in the John Wick series, but there he played a little role as one of those telecommunication behind the scenes people. Yeah, I wanted to mention that here. Okay, let's continue with this list. Let's talk about another franchise that is not Marvel or DC, and a group that we've also seen at least two iterations from. That is the Watchmen, and the next one on this list is the guy called Ozymandias in the 2009 movie, where he was played by Matthew Good. I haven't seen those movies myself, but I know that they were enjoyable, as far as I know. Okay, let's continue with this list. Here's another MCU villain, also played by one of probably the prettiest faces in Hollywood, Mr. Jake Gyllenhaal, or Gyllenhaal, as you're supposed to say, playing Mysterio in the second Spider-Man movie from the MCU trilogy as Mysterio. This is an interesting one for me personally, because I'm gonna be honest, I'm not the biggest Spider-Man, especially when it comes to the MCU, not a huge Spider-Man fan, because I'm just sick and tired of all the school shit, basically. But that is what it comes down to for me. But nonetheless, those movies do hold up quite well when you're not focusing on the school stuff. But I think Mysterio was done pretty well. And how has Jake Gyllenhaal not had an Oscar before? I mean, the man is effortlessly talented, and he's been doing such a lot of work in such a long time. I've seen him in so many movies, from Ambulance to to talk about a previous villain for a moment, Heath Ledger. I'm remembering the name, Brokeback Mountain. That's the name of it. They were together in that movie. Literally. Okay, let's continue. I've talked about Lex Luthor before. Here's another interesting MCU villain Helmut Zemo is arguably one of the most interesting villains when it comes to Marvel, because his goal wasn't to physically intimidate the Avengers in the Civil War movie, and also in the Falcon and the Winter Soldier TV series, where he kind of had a bit of a redemptive arc. And but he's an interesting one because he got the Avengers to fight among themselves, especially those two field leaders, that being this guy and then Captain America. And for me personally, Civil War is at the top of my list when it comes to the Marvel movies. Still incredibly good. It's unfortunate to say though that the scenes with Zemo in that movie are kind of a bit of a drag. Like, or maybe I just need to rewatch that movie again and work on my perspective when it comes to him. Yes, but of course, need to mention Daniel Brühl, who plays the role, and just how amazing that guy is. Also interesting, one of the few non-American actors when it comes to the MCU. German, in fact. So, from my neck of the woods, as you would say. Okay, let's continue. Oh, here's another interesting one from recent years with the MCU. I've also talked about the Guardians of the Galaxy before, and all three of its movies. In that last one, you have the main antagonist being the High Evolutionary, who is portrayed by, I'm gonna read the name to say it properly, Chakwoody Iwuji. Also yet another universe traveler, both Marvel and DC, I mean, because he's played in that Peacemaker TV series. But in this movie, in the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, he is utterly terrifying. And also, given what he does to Rocket Raccoon, spoiler alert if you haven't seen that movie, it's just so tragic and so amazing in its worst kind. And he portrayed that character well, very well, in fact. You know, and whenever I think about that role, too, the High Evolutionary, I know he's not likely to return, but he could be. Especially when we're talking about maybe another person I'm going to find on this list, but I'm going to mention here already the Scarlet Witch, because he's instrumental in Wanda Maximoff becoming the Scarlet Witch. But of course, he's put more in the cosmic side of things, so we're dealing with him in this iteration of the MCU. That with the Guardians of the Galaxy. Okay, I think I've said enough about him. Let's go to the next villain on this list. There's a Superman villain that has seen some success to some extent. Maybe you've heard of the actor called Michael Shannon. He portrayed Zod in some of the Superman movies, the more recent Superman movies, including the Flash movie as well, from recent years. And think about what you want about that movie, but he was not a lot in it, of course, but he's also in that Man of Steel movie, which are the two movies that I was referring to. And of course, important villain when it comes to Superman, because his family, of course. Oh, here's an okay. Next villain in this list is an interesting one because this is also a bit of a universe hopper. Also well known for his role in Marvel, uh, Mr. Samuel L. Jackson, who played a role in the M. Night Shyamalan movies Unbreakable and Glass, where he played Mr. Glass, of course. I wanted to mention that just briefly because I haven't seen those movies myself, but I know that as far as those movies go, they're decent. Yes. Okay, next villain on this list. A bit different from the other ones. Also, not a Marvel or DC movie, but actually an animated movie with The Incredibles, and that is Syndrome, which is a villain, the villain in the first Incredibles movie from 2004. Kind of unbelievable if when you think about it, because it's been 21 years since then. Uh, I wanted to talk about this guy too. Uh, One of the biggest villains when it comes to Marvel that I haven't mentioned yet, but very important when it comes to the MCU, is Loki. And at first, Loki was very much a villain, being the person that sicked the Chitauri forces on New York City and had a long-standing beef with his brother Thor. But the character has really come full circle, and I'm excited to see Loki next and what comes next for the MCU with Secret Wars and Doomsday in the other order. And, well, we have Tom Hiddleston to thank for that because he played that role to perfection. And I remember distinctly seeing that video of him at Comic Con where he absolutely steals the show. And you should look that up if you want. But after watching this video. Okay, next villain on this list. Aha. Another interesting one that I've seen. It's also turned up a few times now. Dr. Otto Octavius, aka Doc Ock. And we've seen that guy return recently with the latest Spider-Man movie where he shows up with Alfred Molina in the octopus pack, I will just call it right now, where he does what he does best. There's also, of course, that iconic line from the first trilogy that he appeared in, the power of the sun in the palm of my hand, where he says that iconic line near the end of that movie. By the way, I say a lot of stuff here that people potentially haven't seen, so I've been using spoiler alert a lot for these kinds of things, but I should probably use some at the beginning of these kinds of videos, these episodes of the FWX podcast. Okay, let's go further. I've talked about the Penguin before, I've talked about the Joker before, and Magneto too, Green Goblin as well. Here's another interesting MCU villain from the Black Panther movie, the first one, Killmonger, played by Michael B. Jordan, who portrayed Eric Stevens, former Navy SEAL, former CIA, with his codename of Killmonger, and with Black Panther being the cultural juggernaut that it was, and an amazing movie in itself, Michael B. Jordan absolutely nailed that role. And speaking of nails, part of his embodiment and his physical prowess is that he has all those scars from every life that he took on his upper body. Uh, it's a great visual, of course. I'd have to talk to people from Marvel to know if that is either CGI or something that they did practically. But it's a great visual nonetheless. Because, of course, the guy is in his prowess. And, well, just a little personal thing for me. I'd love to work with that guy one day. He is absolutely amazing in what he does. Also, he's now been in something that I'm also ecstatic about, and that is more Jack Ryan shizzle. There's a role that Michael B. Jordan has played in a movie before, Without Remorse, where he plays John Clark, who is one of the vital roles in the Jack Ryan verse, of which there is a TV series of John Krasinski, and, well, there we have yet another person who has been in Marvel before as the Earth, the variant of Reed Richards in Multiverse of Madness, which brings me right back on track, and we'll go further on this list. This next one is an interesting one. Well, I said before that maybe we should have more female villains. Next one is Catwoman, who, as far as I've seen any Catwoman roles, which aren't many, it's basically mostly the recent Batman movie with Zoe Kravitz in the role, and then with the younger version played by Cameron Bicondova in Gotham. I hope I said her name right, but I think I butchered it. She's kind of a villain, heroine. You don't really know where she stands, except that she's always looking for an in with Batman, basically. She's always looking for that special something that. Well, she's a thief, actually. So that's quite literally what she's doing. Just like with the Spider-Man comparison, of course, because he has Catwoman. Or maybe, yeah, I've got it wrong. So, Batman has Catwoman, and Spider-Man has Black Cat. Yeah, that's the difference. I almost effed it up there. Okay, that's about everything that I've found on these villains. There are, of course, many, many more to talk about, but I feel like this is a good conclusion to this video. Okay, that is it for me. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about all these villains and all the interesting factors when it comes to being a villain or a hero or something in between, because there's a gray zone where it comes to some villains. And so I want to thank you for sitting through all of that, for watching and listening to me rant. Before I go, you can like this video if you like this kind of content. You can also subscribe to the channel. You can also communicate about it in the comments section if you like. Yeah, okay, that was it. This is the FWX podcast. I'm Frederik, and I will see you in the next video. See ya.